Thank you. Next, we have Laurel Shader from the Silent Spring Institute, and after that, Mario Fernandez y Mora and Timothy Cambereri.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection for hosting today's meeting to discuss the important topic of drinking water guidelines for PFASs, and thanks to the Conservation Law Foundation and Toxics Action Center for putting forward their petition. I'm a research scientist at Silent Spring Institute, where we've been studying PFAS chemicals in drinking water since 2009. I'm also part of the research team for the STEEP Superfund Research Program, a collaboration of the University of Rhode Island, Harvard University, and Silent Spring Institute. I was also a co-organizer of the 2017 PFAS conference that Phil just mentioned. I'd like to share some information and perspectives based on our own research, as well as approaches used by other states and federal agencies. My first point is that PFAS contamination of drinking water supplies is widespread, and the full extent of contamination is not yet known. Silent Spring Institute was the first to detect PFASs in drinking water on Cape Cod. In 2010, we found PFAS, one specific PFAS chemical, in 40% of the public wells we tested, with the highest levels showing up in the Hyannis water system. And in 2011, we found PFASs in half of the private drinking water wells we tested on Cape Cod, including both legacy compounds like PFAS, as well as newer replacement chemicals like PFHXA and PFBS. Nationwide testing required by the EPA between 2013 and 2015 through the UCMR program found PFASs in 5 public water supplies in Massachusetts. Several other water supplies have since been discovered to have PFAS contamination. However, there are likely other Massachusetts public water supplies with PFAS contamination that have not yet been identified. A 2017 analysis by one of the main laboratories that analyzed UCMR samples found that over 40 public water supplies in Massachusetts had concentrations of PFAS or PFOA above 5 parts per trillion, based on samples analyzed as part of UCMR. My second point is that other states have developed drinking water guidelines that are lower than EPA health advisories and the current DEP ORSG. Last week, my colleagues and I published a peer-reviewed journal article in the Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology that summarizes approaches used by states and federal agencies in developing drinking water guidelines for PFAS and PFOA. When we wrote our paper, 3 states had developed drinking water guidelines for PFAS or PFOA that were lower than EPA's 2016 lifetime health advisories. Since then, 3 additional states have also drafted guidelines below EPA's. Our analysis synthesized the reasons why these guidelines vary, and we observed that over time, and Shana showed a graph of this, that drinking water guidelines generally go down as we obtain more scientific information about PFAS health effects. In June of 2018, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry issued an updated toxicological profile for PFASs, including minimal risk levels for 4 PFAS chemicals. These minimal risk levels for PFAS and PFOA were 7 and 11 times lower, respectively, than the reference doses used by EPA when they developed their 2016 health advisories. The current Massachusetts ORSG recommends that the total concentration of 5 PFAS chemicals not exceed 70 parts per trillion. This is more restrictive than EPA's health advisory, which just considers PFAS and PFOA. However, in some instances, this ends up being less restrictive than approaches developed by New Jersey and Vermont. As an example, PFAS levels found in Danvers and Hudson public wells tested through the UCMR testing would not exceed the current Massachusetts ORSG, but would exceed the guidelines in New Jersey and Vermont. My third point is that new science and sensitive endpoints in population should be considered in developing drinking water standards. There are many considerations that go into drinking water guidelines, and I want to mention one of these considerations that was used by the state of New Jersey. The New Jersey Drinking Water Quality Institute, in developing its recommended MCL of 14 parts per trillion for PFOA, noted that target human serum level for delayed mammary gland development was 18 times lower than the target level that they were using to base their standard on, based on liver weight. And this target human serum level for delayed mammary gland development was actually below median serum levels in the general US population. Changes in breast development could have significant public health impact because of the long-term implications for breastfeeding and breast cancer, making this an important endpoint to consider in risk assessment. Although the New Jersey recommended MCL for PFAS does not consider, or is not based on delayed mammary gland development, their MCL for PFOA does include an uncertainty factor to be protective of this effect, as well as other endpoints associated with developmental exposures. To protect public health, MassDEP should establish enforceable drinking water standards for water supplies. This would require that public water supplies monitor for PFASs, ensuring that we are not missing water supplies that currently have PFAS contamination and detecting new contamination in the future. These standards should be low enough to avoid increasing blood PFAS levels substantially above background levels. This is especially important in communities with a long history of contamination. MassDEP should also establish standards for soil and groundwater at contaminated sites to support remediation, require surveillance of water supplies with appropriately low reporting limits, and release existing data so that exposed populations are informed and can take action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Excuse me. Next, I'd like to invite Mario Fernandez Mora of Clean Water Action. And after that, the next folks on the list are Timothy Cambereri, Christopher Clark, and William Coyne. And I'm reading names, if it wasn't indicated whether or not you'd like to speak, I'm reading your name just in case you would. There you go.
Good afternoon, my name is Mario Fernandez Mora, and I'm the Drinking Water Advocate for Clean Water Action, Massachusetts. Clean Water Action is a national organization founded in 1972 in order to pass the Clean Water Act. Our mission is to protect our environment, health, economic well-being, and community quality of life. We have over 500,000 members nationally and 37,000 in Massachusetts. And I'm here today to offer testimony on the issue of PFAS in drinking water. Clean Water Action thanks both Conservation Law Foundation and Toxic Action Center for their diligence in highlighting the urgency of this issue, as well as the need for strong regulatory action to ensure that communities are not further endangered. We would also like to thank DEP in addition to their recent efforts on PFAS, which included the expansion of ORS guidelines to 3 additional PFAS class chemicals for advising communities to expedite PFAS reduction in cases of contamination, advising mothers and children not to drink contaminated water, and for their commitment to transparent and public process. Massachusetts has the opportunity to be a leader on addressing PFAS chemicals in drinking water and on curbing all releases of these chemicals into the environment. We point out that leadership will also be needed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, which is virtually non-existent during the current federal government shutdown. As noted in this petition, the health effects of PFAS were well known among industry leaders, insiders, as far back as the 1980s. Still, industry polluters, negligent consumer products, and chemically reliant military and firefighting exercises have continued, and with it, so has the contamination across the country. A number of cancer, reproductive, and developmental risks have been linked to PFAS exposure. However, despite its well-established presence and the impacts on public health, communities often face this issue alone and with little support. In the absence of PFAS regulation, community members have little access to information of the safety of the water they depend on, and municipalities have little guidance as to how to move forward when and only if PFAS contamination is discovered. In this regard, Massachusetts has the opportunity to be a national leader in the fight for clean drinking water. MassDEP has already laid the groundwork to be such a leader. The recent expansion of ORS guidelines based off of the EPA's current federal advisor for PFOA and PFOS to include PFNA, PFHSX, PFHPA demonstrates that Massachusetts is not going to wait for federal standards to catch up both to science and demonstrated community suffering. However, it cannot be emphasized enough that in a world where chemical companies are going so far as to leave new PFAS chemicals unpatented and therefore untraceable until impact has occurred, a chemical-by-chemical approach is futile. And I just want to take a second to really underscore that in the petition. We heard from a couple of people that we can't do this as a class approach because we don't have all the information on specific PFAS chemicals. And I just want to note that this is largely intentional by the chemical industry. So especially for regulators who are being asked to give them the benefit of the doubt, it should be noted that we could have had more information had they not gone to great lengths to keep these recent PFAS chemicals unpatented and largely unknowable, including by regulators. So instead, DEP must act based off of what we do know. And that's while individual composition of different PFAS chemicals are distinct and constantly multiplying, they share in common devastating health impacts, particularly for pregnant and nursing women and young children. Therefore, DEP should pursue a class-based approach to PFAS drinking water standards. Otherwise, regulators, communities, and advocates will always be at a disadvantage of industry as it continues to churn out thousands of unregulated toxic chemicals. As noted in this petition, this is not a new concept. The EPA made the decision to regulate haloacidic acid byproducts as a class when, as is also true with PFAS, the public health impact of these byproducts was so well established that the absence of complete information about individual acids was less important than the opportunity to reduce public exposure to the entire class of harmful chemicals. A class approach may also inform efforts to address the upstream use of PFAS chemicals, for example in food packaging and other consumer products. So far, manufacturers have relied on the sheer multitude of individual chemicals to avoid regulation and responsibility. We must make sure that polluters are held responsible for creating, using, and discharging the chemicals into the environment in the first place. Those responsible for drinking water source contamination and other releases need to be held accountable. Regulators and elected officials need to make sure that whenever possible, polluters pay. In conclusion, a statewide conversation about PFAS is urgent and largely overdue. While recent DEP initiatives like expanding the ORSCG to PFAS chemicals in total, publishing recommendations pertaining to PFAS consumption for sensitive subgroups, and advising public water suppliers to take expeditious action in lowering the levels of these 5 designated PFAS chemicals demonstrate the seriousness of the situation, it does not yet adequately provide a path forward for ensuring the safety of Massachusetts residents. Moving forward will depend on, as called for in the petition, a robust stakeholders process. Clean Water Action endorses all creative thinking as different stakeholders continue to find the best solutions for this ongoing issue. For our part, we recommend continuing these public processes so that everyone has a chance to take part in establishing best practices for the monitoring, regulation, and treatment of PFAS. DEP identifying and connecting communities with all possible strategies and funding for effective drinking water treatment, including polluter payback whenever possible. Establishing a class-based approach to regulation so that advocates and consumers can address PFAS contamination based off of what is most important, public health. Finally, the DEP drinking water program should work with all other DEP offices and appropriate state agencies to address PFAS chemicals in order to prevent release into the environment. Such action could include surface water quality standards, pre-treatment industrial user standards, and land application limits as described in this petition. We look forward to continuing to participate in these vital conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Timothy Cambereri, would you like to speak? Christopher Clark. And after Christopher, the next names I have on the list are William Coyne, Aaron DeSantis, and Matthew Emerson.
Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Clark. I am from Westfield, Massachusetts, representing 40,000 residents. Today I'm particularly here to represent the children of Westfield. I ironically started research in a toxicology lab at the University of Massachusetts Amherst that studies developmental effects of PFAS before I even found out that I had been exposed to PFAS. I come from the ward of Westfield that has suffered the most from the contamination. I have been exposed to PFAS since my conception. Therefore, there hasn't been a moment in my existence where I have been PFAS-free. This goes for all the children in Westfield, and that scares me. Of the health effects listed earlier, myself and the other members of my community advocacy group could easily pick out multiple diseases that our friends and families have. I catch myself wondering whether my dad's cancer, my grandmother's thyroid disease, and a combination of diseases that has left my uncle dead was in part due to the exposure of PFAS and other co-contaminants given to us free of charge by the DoD and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. My blood concentration is unknown, and this is consistent with the other 40,000 plus residents in Westfield. Coming from an environmental justice community, the costs of blood testing make ever knowing out of reach. We haven't been given access to blood testing by the state of Massachusetts and its Department of Public Health. And now, we are here. We're here fighting for our lives. I support the regulation of PFAS as a class, and I'm asking for a drinking water standard. While monitoring for PFAS, I am in support of total oxidizable precursor assay. Again, that's total oxidizable precursor assay. What that does, it gives us the idea of how many fluorinated compounds that may be in the background for the ones that we aren't able to detect. I would happily disagree that this is a sound method to help protect communities like mine. The synergistic effects of PFAS have not yet been identified, and it is foolish to consider that this will not have any adverse interactions in the human body. Now, on terms of treatment technologies, there are none that can fully protect public health. There will be none until there is an endpoint that leads in its total destruction. The source for treatment technology in the petition is missing. What is this treatment train? The best we can come up with is granular activated carbon filtration, and that's only 90% effective against one compound. I cannot on a clean conscience support reverse osmosis either, while at the same time sending that effluent somewhere else. A report by Chris Higgins from the Colorado School of Mines has projected that there are about 40 PFASs in AFFF. And you can't even imagine the biological transformations, all the different chemical soups that happens once that enters into the environment. How are we going to guarantee the protection of a community when we regulate 5 and filter for 1? The numbers just don't make sense to me. I do not support treating toxic water. Myself and my family will not take the risk that the filtration system could or could not work. We will continue to buy cases of bottled water that we buy. I don't even know how many we go through on a weekly basis. I need to get my water from a different source. I will not become a test subject for the state. I ask the people in this room to take this issue seriously. I ask policymakers to base their decisions with sound science, and for once, please use the precautionary principle in going forward with new policy decisions. I want to thank MassDEP, CLF, and TAC for bringing us together. Those in attendance, I hope we can reach a solution that will at least protect our future generations, and so that maybe not my generation, but the next generation can live a PFAS-free life. Thank you.